Abbey, but I was looking it up online and I'm pretty sure you pronounce it Northanger, so my bad. Hello, welcome back to another video. Today I am continuing on my Summer of Jane Austen, this saga of mine. I am reading all of Jane Austen's works this summer. I started with Pride and Prejudice, I've read Sense and Sensibility, and I just finished up Mansfield Park, so check out all of those videos if you are interested in watching. Today I am starting Northanger Abbey. I don't know anything about this book except for the fact that it is kind of gothic. I think it's like the most gothic-esque book from Jane Austen, so I'm super jazzed about that. I have to say, very vainly, I painted my nails to match the cover, but my nails are chipping already. I painted them 2 days ago and they're just like so bad. But anyway, does not matter. I am so excited to start this. Again, I know nothing about it. It is just after work and it is Monday. So honestly, I have no idea why I have this much energy. I don't know. It's weird. But it's also a kind of gloomy summer's day. And I feel like it is the perfect day to go walk to the park and read the first few pages. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to expect. I did take a few days off because if you watched my Mansfield Park video, you'll know that it was a little bit of a struggle on this journey. I think I said at one point that I was halfway through the marathon and that book made me trip. Straight up trip. So I needed to take a little bit of a break, but we are back and I am super, super jazzed to start this today and to share my thoughts with you. So without further ado, I hope you are cozy. If not, get cozy and let's dive into Northanger Abbey. Okay, so I have to say that the introduction just spoiled the book for me. Which I don't know how I feel about it, but it says here that Catherine marries the first man she dances with. So, and I know that Catherine is the main character of the book, so I guess I'm gonna have to keep a lookout for the first man that she dances with, and I guess that will be the ending. I'm not a big stickler when it comes to spoilers. I actually don't really care if I find out how the book ends or what happens or anything. For me, it's all about the journey. It's not about the destination. So I'm not that perturbed by it, but I imagine that maybe some people would be. I don't know. I mean, would you be upset if Jane Austen was spoiled for you because it's so old? What is your name? What is your name? Mr. Tilney? Why is it weird to pronounce that name out loud? Tilney. Mr. Tilney? In my mind, it's Mr. Tingley. Does that ever happen when you read? Sometimes I read and I realize that a word is just nowhere close to what I thought it was going to be. Let's talk about it. Let's have a little chat. Cheers. I have the best news, and that is I'm absolutely loving this. I am absolutely loving this. I mean, I'm only on chapter 6, so I'm only 23 pages in. I'm really enjoying the writing. I think that Jane Austen does something really interesting in this book where she lets the narrator be a third person. There are times where she literally takes you out of the story to say something and to tell you something. I like when authors give you a little bit of a wink. So right away we meet the protagonist, the heroine, Catherine Morland, and I was pretty much hooked on this book from the opening sentence because I actually really like the opening sentence of this book, and I'm gonna say I actually like it more than Pride and Prejudice's opening. Truly. And it could be because I'm more of a character-driven reader than I am an overall plot-driven reader. This is the opening line. No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be a heroine. I love it. This whole book, I'm on page 23. Just remember that. I'm not that far into it. This could go crashing downhill at any moment. But so far, I really like the kind of third person situation that's going on in this novel. And I talked about it briefly before, where Jane Austen is treating the narrator as a third person, and there's this commentary that is happening on the novel as a form already that I really enjoy, and I think it's just really smart. It's really smart and it's really fun, and not only that, I'm thoroughly enjoying the characters. I really like Catherine. I feel like I'm enjoying everything I learn about her. I have highlighted so many passages because I also just think that it's really well written. I mean, there are so many like fun, delightful moments. One of those moments right off the top is still again talking about Catherine and talking about her evolution into womanhood and how she, was kind of a plain child, but she started growing into this more handsome woman, and everyone around her started commenting on it. And at one point, when she was, I think this is when she is around 15, her mother and father are talking about her, and they make a comment about how she is almost pretty today and she is growing into quite a fine woman. And Catherine is absolutely delighted about this, and Jane Austen writes, "To look almost pretty is an acquisition of higher delight to a girl who has been looking plain the first 15 years of her life than a beauty from her cradle can ever receive." And there's kind of like there's humor back into the prose. And when I say back, I just am literally reliving the chaos that was Mansfield Park when I had no idea what had happened. It's satirical almost. What else am I loving? I mean, I'm loving so very much. Catherine is outed to society and is put in the care of a Miss Allen, who, now that I think about it, I don't actually know how she's related to her. Miss Allen was one of the numerous class of females whose society can raise no other emotion than surprise at there being any men in the world who could like them enough to marry them. She had neither beauty, genius, accomplishment, nor manner. But she's kind of delightful. I mean, she is not particularly good at ensuring that Catherine Morland is presented to society in the proper way. That is, they go to parties where, this is one of the funny things about this time period, they go to parties where they don't know anyone, and due to the time period, it was not polite to go up to someone and introduce yourself. You had to be introduced to people. And I think that that was especially true when people were of a higher rank in society than you, which I think almost everybody is in this book, because Catherine is just the daughter of a clergyman. So Miss Allen takes Catherine to parties where they can't talk to anybody, and for so long she's in this town of Bath and she doesn't have any friends. They go to a party, no one dances with her. She is beside herself because she doesn't have any friends and she can't introduce herself to people because everyone is super weird at that time. And then they go to another party and they get the MC, the master of ceremonies. They get him to introduce them to Tilney. Mr. Tilney is his name. And this is what is said about Mr. Tilney. He seemed to be about 4 or 5 and 20, and was rather tall, had a pleasing countenance, a very intelligent and lively eye, and if not quite handsome, was very near it. His address was good, and Catherine felt herself in high luck. There was little leisure time for speaking while they danced, but when they were seated at tea, she found him as agreeable as she had already given him credit for being. And to be honest, so did I. I love the banter between the two of them. Mr. Tilney makes her laugh and is funny and is like kind of cheeky. Like, he's cheeky, and he also, much like the narrator, does like a little wink to just her, and I fell in love immediately. I fell in love immediately. He says, well, are you going to write about this encounter in your journal? And you're probably going to say about like how weird I am. To be honest, he is like a little weird, and I like that. I really like that. Like, he's like a little off-putting and mysterious and, again, just cheeky, and I'm in love. I'm smitten. It's exactly what I want and how I pictured a Jane Austen book to be. I would be remiss to not mention the fact that Catherine also makes another friend outside of her acquaintance with Mr. Tilney, and that is Miss Thorpe, and they become incredibly fast friends. And to be honest, like, I really like the writing around their friendship. I really like the way that they kind of develop as friends, and I'm really happy for Catherine to have a friend. All the while, after the dance, she's waiting for Mr. Tilney to call upon her, and he doesn't, and he disappears and becomes a little bit mysterious. And there's just this really great line too, where this sort of mysteriousness, which is always so becoming in a hero, threw a fresh grace in Catherine's imagination around his person and manners, and increased her anxiety to know more of him. Again, there's like this level of satire that's happening around novels and stories, and it's so smart, but it's also just like a really fun story. At the very end of chapter 5, I feel like this is pretty famous. I didn't know about this beforehand, but I did look it up after, because I was like, wow, this is very different than what I was expecting. Jane Austen goes off on a very strong tangent in defense of novels at the time. You know, novels at the time were often mocked and ridiculed as being overdramatic and not thought-provoking and not smart. It was commonplace for main characters within novels to make snide comments about novels. When she's talking about this friendship between Catherine and Isabella, she talks about all of the things that they like to do together, and that they couldn't spend moments apart, and even if it was raining, they would meet in defiance of the wet and dirt and shut themselves up to read novels together. And then she literally goes off and says, yes, novels. She goes on, like, it is a probably full page of her just saying, I said what I said, they're reading novels. And she calls out other writers by name, and she says, let us not desert one another, we are an injured body. Although our productions have afforded more extensive and unaffected pleasure than those of any other literary corporation in the world, no species of composition has been so much decried. There seems almost a general wish of decrying the capacity and undervaluing the labor of the novelist, and of slighting the performances which have only genius, wit, and taste to recommend them. Honestly, she goes off, and I have to respect it, because I'm sure at the time it was incredibly frustrating as a novelist. This story is nothing like War and Peace, but there are elements in War and Peace where Tolstoy takes you out of the story to just talk at you, to just tell you about history, and to kind of philosophize in a way that I found incredibly engaging and I loved. And I loved that this moment happened in this book so early on, where Jane Austen was literally like, yeah, novels. They're reading novels. They like reading novels. You're reading a novel. Why would I write a novel and then make fun of novels? That doesn't make any sense. And all of these writers, she lists them by name. You should be doing better. In so many ways, I'm very glad that I was spoiled that Mr. Tilney is the end game, because I really like him. And it feels good, frankly, after the last 2 books, to be so into the couple, because the last 2 books, it was hard. And now I am just ready to continue on this story and see how it develops. Very sadly, I have to get to work. But I just wanted to say that I'm feeling a little bit suspicious of Isabella now. Just a little bit. She is... essentially the only thing that has happened is Catherine's brother has come to Bath to visit, and Isabella has met her brother, and Catherine went on a very inappropriate carriage ride with Isabella's brother. And Isabella's kind of turning into a little bit of a pushy individual, and she's becoming the kind of typical over-the-top Jane Austen character that ultimately proves to be not who they claim to be, if that makes sense. I don't know if I trust her anymore. She is doing this thing where she's kind of undercutting Catherine. She undercuts her by saying like, oh, like, you know, guys love you and things like that. We shall see. I also realized that I've been calling it Northanger Abbey, but I was looking it up online and I'm pretty sure you pronounce it Northanger Abbey, so my bad. Are kind of just resting on my bed, so hopefully this is a decent angle. I keep wanting to not update because I feel like I'm just updating so much, but I am loving this. It is so good. I'm enjoying it so much. I mean, like, look at this. Look at everything that I've highlighted, because there's just like, there's so many like good moments. Mr. Tilney, man. Catherine and Mr. Tilney's banter is like the best banter of any of the books that I've read so far. I love every scene that they are together in, and I just feel like I'm feeling so good about it. They have danced again. They met up and they danced again, and I was just smiling like a fool the entire scene because, like, it's so good. I feel like that's all I can say. It's just like, it's so good. There's this really awesome moment when they're dancing where Mr. Thorpe is a friend of her brother, of Catherine's brothers. He's also the brother of Isabella. And if you remember, Isabella is her really close friend. He sounds like he has feelings for Catherine. He's real obnoxious and just like always in her face and like always wanting her attention and like very braggadocious about his horse. My God, he talks about his horse so much. It's so funny. And Isabella kind of wants them to get together. She's starting to get a little pushy, and I'm starting to trust her less and less. And Isabella is also forming a little bit of a, whatever you want to call it, with Catherine's brother. They go to a ball, and finally Mr. Tinley is there, and he asks Catherine to dance. And during the dance, Mr. Thorpe, the obnoxious man that he is, interrupts the dance and starts talking to Catherine and says, "Oh, I wanted you to dance with me. I asked you to dance with me," and all this stuff. And she was like, "No, you didn't." And it's really annoying. It's really obnoxious. She goes back to focusing on dancing with Mr. Tilney, and he basically is like, "Who is that man that you were just talking to? I can't believe you're talking to another man while we're dancing." But he's kind of joking, and it's really cute. And like, I don't know, I just like, I'm really digging his sense of humor. I think he's like a weird and like wonderful human being. And she says, "Well, Mr. Thorpe is a very particular friend of my brother's, that if he talks to me, I must talk to him again. But there are hardly 3 young men in this room besides him that I have any acquaintance with." Mr. Tilney responds, "And is that to be my only security? Alas, alas." And then she says, "Nay, I am sure you cannot have a better, for if I do not know anybody, it is impossible for me to talk to them, and besides, I do not want to talk to anybody." And then he responds, "Now you have given me a security worth having, and I shall proceed with courage." And then he talks about like if she's enjoying the country, and they have this whole conversation about Bath and how it's boring on his end, and oh, it's just delightful. I just really, really like it. And Catherine is so desperate to get to know him. So she is trying to become friends with his sister, and they agree to go on a walk together if the weather is agreeable. And so Catherine waits and waits and waits all morning, obsessing over whether or not the weather is going to clear up. And it's really rainy, and she's really heartbroken. Isabella, her brother, and Mr. Thorpe show up, and they say, "Let's go to a carriage ride. Let's go visit this castle." And she goes, "No, we can't, because I'm waiting for my guests to arrive. I've agreed to go on a walk with them." And they go, "Oh, they're not coming. We saw them like in another part of town. They're not coming. It's far too miserable out there for a walk." They lied to her. So Isabella is a part of this kind of like ruse to get Catherine together with her brother, Mr. Thorpe, and that's really upsetting to me. And Catherine was heartbroken. Actually, the scene is so good. They're driving in a carriage, and she's driving in a carriage with Mr. Thorpe, and they drive past Miss Tilney. Oh my gosh, Megan, Miss Tilney. They drive past Miss Tilney, and Catherine is yelling at Mr. Thorpe to stop, like, "You gotta stop the carriage, they're right there." And she goes, "How can you tell me they were gone? I will get out this moment and go to them." And she is so mad at him, and rightfully so. Later, Isabella is like, again, not really apologetic, and like, I'm kind of upset that she would do this to her friend. And she blames the Tilneys entirely and says, they're completely to blame. Why were they not more punctual? And then she pushes her brother on Catherine and says, "I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it. He has such strong, wonderful feelings, and he's a really good man." There's so much drama, but like, I'm loving it. Yeah, I'm only 64 pages in, and I don't want to stop, but unfortunately I have to. So, onward. They arranged to go on another walk, and again, Isabella's brother, Mr. Thorpe, and Catherine's brother all were like, "We're gonna go on a walk tomorrow." And Catherine is saying, "No, I have a previous engagement. I cannot cancel." And I don't know. I'm starting to really like not like Isabella. Isabella was trying all kinds of ways to get Catherine to agree to it, and she was being incredibly manipulative. You know, at first she started being really nice to her and being really affectionate and, you know, really trying to beseech her. And when that didn't work, she started crying and saying, well, you clearly like this other girl more than me. So very, very manipulative. Catherine is still not falling for it. She's still saying, I'm doing what I think is right. I have a previous engagement and I cannot cancel. I've already canceled. Even her brother is stepping in now and being like, wow, I did not realize you were so unkind. And Catherine is mortified, but is still saying, no, we can't. Then Mr. Thorpe comes in, and, you know, one thing about Mr. Thorpe, which I think is really funny, is that he swears and his curse word is damn. And it's blanked out. So he's, you know, like, God, not God damn it. I think that would be insane if they said God damn it. But he's like, oh, damn me if you don't go. Like, we're not going if you don't go. And Catherine still is like, look, okay, how about we go on Tuesday? Let's go on Tuesday. Doesn't that sound great? And they're all like, it will not do. We're not going on Tuesday. Like, they are being so mean to Catherine. And finally, Mr. Thorpe walks away in anger and then comes back and is like, you know what? Problem solved. I have solved the problem. We can all go tomorrow and you don't have to worry about it, Catherine. And she's like, okay, what did you do? He went to Mr. Tilney behind her back in this brief moment and was like, she can't go with you. So he straight up went to the other people. Oh my gosh, everyone here sucks but Catherine and the Tilneys. I can't believe it. That was my genuine reaction to that. Look, I understand that all of these problems are like super lame. It's really funny to me that like the drama surrounds a walk, but I can't believe that. Wow. He's so proud of himself too, Mr. Thorpe, coming up with this solution. Like, he's like, oh, that was a pretty good thought of mine. Hey, isn't that great? I have to admit that the characters in this book are absolutely delightful to follow, even if they suck. A lot of them suck. So, all right, we're gonna keep going with it. I needed to update. I've been updating so much and I feel like there's so much I want to talk about with this book. I'm just over the halfway mark. I'm on chapter 17, approaching page 100 of this edition. And other than the drama surrounding the walk and all of that I've talked about, the only other major thing that has happened is Isabel, Catherine's best friend, is now engaged secretly, I suppose, not so secretly anymore, to her brother. And Catherine is elated about this. She loves her brother. She loves Isabella. She loves that they love each other. She is so, so happy. Catherine has also been on a visit with the Tilneys, and oh my gosh, we've got to spend more time with Mr. Tilney. We have gotten to fall in love with him even more. I honestly think he is probably my favorite lead, and I don't know how he will be topped by the other books that I'm reading, but truly, I just love him. He is smart, he's sarcastic. I love how sarcastic he is. There's a whole scene where they are discussing novels. Again, this book is very much a defense of the novel, which I am here for. I was actually talking about it with Tom last night, and I was saying that, you know, think of it like the equivalent of chick lit nowadays, or even something like Bridgerton. There's so much hate around the love of things like Bridgerton and chick lit, and it's so rooted in sexism. And this book, it's just so interesting to read a historical defense of this as well. You know, it's a conversation that has been happening since the beginning of time about what women enjoy and what we consume. And I just think it's just, I'm here for Jane Austen's defense of it, is all I'm gonna say. Catherine makes a comment to Henry, who I'm going to call Henry because I keep stumbling on Tilney. I don't know why. She says to Henry, "You never read novels," basically. She's like, "We don't have to talk about it because you don't ever read novels. I assume you don't read novels." And he goes, "Why would you assume that?" Oh, I just lost my place. And she says, "Because they are not clever enough for you. Gentlemen read better books." And I feel like his response is a classic Jane Austen quote that many people have heard. And he responds, "The person, be it gentleman or lady, who has not pleasure in a good novel must be intolerably stupid." Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tilney, aka Henry, reading different types of books, and Catherine saying, she doesn't really love to read about history. And as a history lover, as someone who loves history and loves to read about history, her response and her take on history books is really funny to me. "I read it a little as a duty, but it tells me nothing that does not either vex or weary me. The quarrels of popes and kings with wars or pestilences in every page, the men also good for nothing, and hardly any women at all. It is very tiresome." Oh, I was just smiling so giddily throughout this entire exchange because it just again, it's everything that I want in classic literature. It's a delightful scene intermixed with intellectual thought. I think I'm witnessing the fall of Isabella. She goes and meets the Tilneys with Catherine and has a weirdly negative reaction to them. She just says she doesn't like them. She says that they treat Catherine horribly and that she should absolutely forget about this Henry guy because he does not like her, and oh my gosh, her brother is far superior. So again, she's really pushing her brother on Catherine. And Catherine, to her credit, says, "I didn't get that vibe from them." I wish she said, "I didn't get that vibe from them." But she says, "I didn't get that vibe from them." Kind of odd. She's very suspicious of what Isabella is saying. So then they decide to go to a ball, and Isabella, since she's engaged to Catherine's brother, declares she is not going to dance. Absolutely not. No one will persuade her to dance. And Catherine believes her. Lo and behold, at the dance, we meet Henry's brother, Captain Tilney, and he persuades Isabella to dance. This happens off screen, so we don't actually know what happens, but Isabella claims that he pressured her and she couldn't possibly say no. So again, we're seeing more and more suspect behavior from Isabella. I think Catherine is a very interesting character because she is quite naive. She's quite good-hearted. Henry says it actually best to her when they are discussing the fact that Isabella danced with Henry's brother, despite the fact that she declared she wasn't going to dance with anybody. And Henry kind of smirks and says something along the lines of, "It must trouble you greatly to think about other people's motivations." And Catherine presses him further, and he says this to her: "I only meant that your attributing my brother's wish of dancing with Miss Thorpe to good nature alone convinced me of your being superior in good nature yourself to all of the rest of the world." And I really think that that summarizes Catherine to me. I think that she is good. I think that we're supposed to believe that she's naive, but I really hate, it's not that I really hate, but I almost refuse to believe that naive people are stupid. I think that people can believe the good in other people and still be incredibly strong individuals. And that is my hot take with Catherine. I feel like she believes in the good of people. She has shown over and over again that she's not someone that can be walked all over. She didn't go on the walk when everyone around her that she holds dear was telling her that they are being hurt by her actions. And she didn't relent because she knew what was good in that situation, and that makes her a good individual. And I don't believe that being a good individual makes you weak. I mean, sometimes yes, sometimes they are written and you are like, why would you make that decision? If Catherine had decided to go on the walk regardless and just bend to everyone's will around her, then I would claim her to be a weak character. But she is not. She is good, and she is steadfast in her good, and I really admire that about this book in particular. While it is so easy to be cynical, I am the world's biggest cynic 90% of the time. When I see someone good holding on to their goodness in a world that is convincing them every minute to do bad, I do not see that as weak. And that is my defense of Catherine thus far. As a reminder, I am only halfway through. Who knows what's gonna happen? I really, really like it, and I'm so pleased that I'm loving a Jane Austen. I was worried up until this point that I probably was gonna be like 4 to 5 stars for all of these, but this book I cannot stop thinking about. I just want to keep going, but unfortunately I have to start my work day. Shut the window, I've grabbed myself some water, and I'm ready to dive into this because I just finished, and 5 out of 5 stars. 5 out of 5 glorious stars. I loved this book so much. This is easily my favorite that I've read so far. I don't even know how to summarize what has happened in the second half of the book. So much was packed in. This book is so many things. It's an exploration of parental relationships. It's a romance, of course, but it's also a satirical take on novels. And essentially the second half of this book, Catherine goes to Northanger Abbey to visit with the Tilneys. She has developed a very close friendship with Henry's sister, Eleanor, who is another favorite character of mine. I absolutely love her. Upon entering and discussing the Abbey, which is this beautiful old estate, you know, Henry kind of teases Catherine a little bit and says, are you going to be scared? Because, you know, a lot of things have happened in stories in buildings such as these. And he paints this incredibly vivid description of her awaking in the middle of the night with a candle in hand and stumbling upon a manuscript, and suddenly the candle goes out. And Catherine plays it cool in this scene and says, you know, this is not going to scare me. And almost the immediate scene happens in real life, and Catherine's imagination gets the better of her, and she discovers this pile of paper in a wardrobe and is too terrified to read it that night, but has a restless night the whole time thinking about it, only to wake up the next day and discover that it is a pile of essentially paperwork to keep the house running. And it's really funny. There's a lot of like funny moments that happen. That is one of the scenes where I feel like it had such beautiful writing. She's looking at the candle in this moment and remembering Henry's words and is thinking, that candle's not going to go out. It's not going to snuff out. And suddenly it does. It completely goes out, and she's standing in the darkness, and it says, Catherine for a few moments was motionless with horror. It was done completely. Not a remnant of light in the wick could give hope to the rekindling breath. Darkness, impenetrable and immovable, filled the room. A violent gust of wind, rising with sudden fury, added fresh horror to the moment. It's such good writing in this moment, and I think maybe it's because I love Gothic writing, and Austen is really stretching into that in this moment. Another great passage is hollow murmurs seemed to creep along the gallery, and more than once her blood was chilled by the sound of distant moans. Hour after hour passed away, and the wearied Catherine had heard 3 proclaimed by all the clocks in the house before the tempest subsided, or she unknowingly fell fast asleep. I just think that I thought it was really funny that in this moment, the object of fear was a manuscript. It was literally a book. Just to wrap up a little bit of the other storylines, and to start very briefly with Isabella, the storyline with Isabella and Catherine's brother comes to quite an abrupt ending, where Catherine receives a letter from her brother when she's at the abbey, essentially informing her that the engagement has been called off. And she's quite distraught about this. He blames Isabella in the letter, says that her heart lies elsewhere, and indeed lies with Tilney's brother. What was really interesting about that storyline is that I feel like it just was representative of Catherine's character arc and development. You know, she starts out believing only the best in Isabella and only the best in anyone around her. She receives a letter from Isabella and very much doesn't believe her. And I feel like Catherine at the beginning of this novel would believe anything that Isabella said to her. And it really does represent her growth in character there. One of the other things that happens that's kind of crazy is going on the imagination element is Catherine almost immediately believes that Tilney's father killed his mother. Like instantly, like she like just gets like a vibe right away and just decides it. And so again, her imagination carries her away to this place, and it abruptly is put to an end when Tilney discovers this. Henry stumbles upon her searching his dead mother's room and puts it together that she suspects this. I mean, ultimately she confesses it and he tells her that is crazy. It was so much fun to read. Like, there were so many things that happened that I don't think I could appropriately dive into without this being hours and hours long. But I think the most important thing for me was the relationship between Catherine and Henry and their development. And I really just loved Henry from the beginning. I loved his character. I think he is a very sarcastic, intelligent individual who thrives off of intelligent conversation. And you get that almost from the get-go. But I also think that he loves to kind of pull people's legs in conversations. I really did not read it as condescending at all. I actually read it as him viewing her as an equal. And I think that's one of my favorite things that I've come to discover about Jane Austen is the amount of interpretation that one can have with the stories. And this one by far takes the cake for me. Just I already want to go back and reread this and like take different notes and really kind of dive into each of the elements that I talked about at the beginning. I absolutely loved the way Henry and Catherine's storyline wrapped up. Things that I truly appreciated is when there was a misunderstanding between Henry's father and Catherine, which led to him basically kicking her out of the house. Henry immediately resolves to solve it. He wastes no time in going to Catherine and explaining, and I really liked it. I really, really liked this. I think the last thing that I'm going to talk about, there's a moment when Henry is proposing to Catherine. Yeah, there's a moment when Henry goes and he proposes to Catherine and tells her what his father was up to and how his father was misled. By the way, he was misled by Mr. Thrope, of course, worst man alive. And Austen again steps out as the narrator and says, "I must confess that his affection," meaning Tilney's affection for Catherine, "originated in nothing better than gratitude, or in other words, that a persuasion of her partiality for him had been the only cause of giving her serious thought." It is a new circumstance in romance, I acknowledge, and dreadfully derogatory of a heroine's dignity. But if it is to be new in common life, the credit of a wild imagination will at least be all my own. And I think it's funny because I'm sure, even when I read that, I was like, okay, so what you're telling me is that he only liked her because she was interested in him. I think, though, what we are seeing is the product of the time and what Austen was writing, and she wanted to write realism. She wanted to write realistic love stories and not grand love stories where love at first sight happens and, you know, infatuation takes over. And this book is very much a lesson on imagination taking over. And so I think that line, I don't read it so much as like, you know, Henry only loved her because she loved him. I read it again as Austen stepping out, which is why I think she steps out of the narration and says, this is just a love story. It's a simple love story. You know, nothing crazy is happening. And I think that can be a little detrimental and maybe why I didn't love Austen's writing till this point, but I loved it. But it, honestly, actions speak louder than words, and in my mind, Henry's actions are that of a man in love pretty much from the beginning. And while he does tease Catherine, I see it as like him teasing her as an equal. I'm so very, very glad that I read this. I'm so glad that I read this. 5 out of 5 stars. My favorite Jane Austen. My favorite Jane Austen lead. And my favorite Jane Austen love interest. Because I just really enjoyed this story. I'm kind of bummed that it's over. And we only have 2 more books to go on our journey. So next up, I know I've been saying this whole time that I want to read Emma last, but I might leave Persuasion to be last because it is shorter. That is the only reason. And I feel like, I don't know, we'll see. We shall see. I'm gonna do some research and see which one I want to read. But for now, 5 out of 5 stars. I implore you to pick this up and to read it first because I loved it, and I'm so happy. I'm so happy to have read it.